Even in the flickering neon of a broken city, there is a path toward redemption for those brave enough to walk it. Witness the powerful transformation of lives once lost, now finding their purpose in the glow of the truth. Hit subscribe now and let the light lead the way. My wife left for Savannah on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was watching the news, when she kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't forget to eat lunch, Thomas." That was Margaret always worrying about me even when she was the one getting on a plane. Our daughter, Claire, had just bought her first house. A fixer-upper in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Savannah. The kind of place with big oak trees and a porch that needed new boards. Claire had asked her mother to come help set up the kitchen, hang curtains, pick out rugs. Margaret had been talking about it for 3 weeks. She packed 2 extra bags just for the things she was bringing Claire as housewarming gifts: good cast iron, her spare set of mixing bowls, a quilt her own mother had made. I stayed home in Asheville because my knee was giving me trouble, and I had a follow-up appointment with my orthopedist on Thursday. I told Margaret I'd drive down the following weekend once the doctor cleared me for longer trips. She said that was fine. She called me that first evening from Savannah and said the house was charming, that Claire had made a pot roast, and that her son-in-law Derek had been perfectly pleasant. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. She did not call me the next morning. I didn't think much of it at first. Margaret sometimes got absorbed in a project and lost track of time. I figured she and Claire were at a hardware store or picking out curtains somewhere, and she'd forgotten to charge her phone. I sent her a text around noon. Nothing. I tried again at 2. Still nothing. I called Claire's number at 4 o'clock, and it rang through to voicemail. By 6 that evening, I was standing in my kitchen with my car keys in my hand. My knee ached the entire 4 hours down I-26. I stopped once for gas outside Spartanburg and kept the radio off the whole way because I needed to think. I ran through every reasonable explanation. Margaret dropped her phone in the toilet. There was some kind of family emergency with Derek's people that pulled everyone away. The girls got so deep into home improvement that they just lost the whole day. Each explanation sounded thinner than the last. I pulled onto Claire's street a little after 10 at night. The house was dark except for one light in the front room. I parked at the curb and walked up the front path. And that is when the side gate opened and a woman came around the corner of the house moving fast, her arms out like she was trying to stop traffic. "Please," she said. "Please don't go in yet. Please wait." She was a small woman, maybe 60 herself, with gray hair pulled back and a work apron still on. She had clearly been crying. Her name, I learned in the next 30 seconds, was Dolores. She had been cleaning houses in that neighborhood for 11 years. She cleaned Claire's house every Wednesday. She had found my wife that afternoon. I don't remember sitting down on the porch steps, but apparently I did, because Dolores sat down next to me and put her hand on my arm, and she talked to me in a very low and careful voice, and told me what she had found. Margaret was in the guest bedroom. She was breathing, but she would not wake up. Dolores had called 911 immediately. The paramedics had come. Margaret was at Memorial University Medical Center. She had been there since roughly 2 in the afternoon. I could not understand why no one had called me. Dolores said she had tried to find a phone to call the family. She said she had asked Derek for the emergency contacts before the ambulance left. She told me, in the quiet and steady way of a woman who understood exactly how serious what she was saying was, that Derek had told her he would handle it. He had not handled it. I was at the hospital in 20 minutes. The doctor who met me in the corridor was a young woman named Dr. Okafor, and she had the careful eyes of someone who had been wanting to speak to a family member for several hours and had been waiting. She walked me to a small family room off the main hallway, and she closed the door. And I knew before she said a word that what she was about to tell me was not a fall, not a stroke, not any of the ordinary terrible things that happen to people Margaret's age. She told me my wife had been sedated. Not by accident. Not by a medication mix-up. Someone had given her something. And the amount found in her system was not consistent with any prescription she was on, and not consistent with an accident. The attending physician had flagged it within an hour of her admission and had already contacted the police. Dr. Okafor said they were doing everything they could, that Margaret was stable, and that she was lucky to have been found when she was. She used the word lucky twice. I sat in that room for a long time after the doctor left. The fluorescent light above me hummed. Someone had given my wife enough sedative to put her under for a day and a half. Someone had done this inside my daughter's house. And the person who should have called me had instead come home, made himself dinner, and gone to sleep. I need to stop here and tell you who Derek is. Because I have been careful with that so far, and I don't want to be careful anymore. Derek Marsh was 36 years old. He was Claire's husband of 4 years. He was handsome, in the way that men who know they are handsome tend to be always a little too aware of a room. He worked in commercial real estate, and he was good at it. And he spent money the way people spend money when they believe more is always coming. He and Claire had a lifestyle that required constant fuel. The house in Savannah was their third address in 4 years. I had never particularly trusted him. I want to be honest about that. I had never trusted him, but I had never had a reason solid enough to say anything to Claire that she would have believed coming from her father. Parents learn this over time, that your children will choose the person they choose, and your job is to be there when they need you, not to be right. Margaret trusted him less than I did, and said it even less than I did, which was saying something. What I did not know, sitting in that hospital hallway, was that Derek had been in serious financial trouble for 8 months. His brokerage had made a set of bad investments in a commercial development outside Atlanta, and Derek had personally guaranteed a portion of the debt. He owed money he could not pay. The house they had just bought, the one Claire had called her dream home, had a second mortgage Derek had taken out without telling her. What I also did not know was that Margaret and I, in our estate planning, had made Claire the sole heir to a life insurance policy worth just under $1 million. I had put this together years ago and never updated it, and never thought much about it because Margaret and I were both healthy, and there was no reason to think about it. Derek knew about the policy. He had seen the paperwork in Claire's files 2 years earlier. I know all of this now because the detective told me. Her name was Detective Sandra Pollard, and she was from the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police, and she sat across from me in a room at the precinct 2 days after I arrived, and she laid it out the way a carpenter lays out tools before starting a job. Everything in order. Everything with a purpose. Derek had researched sedative interactions for 5 weeks before Margaret's visit. His search history showed him looking up dosages, looking up detection windows, looking up what a body found unconscious in a home might initially look like to first responders. He had purchased the drug through a contact he had made during a real estate transaction, a man who has since cooperated with the prosecution. He had put it in the chamomile tea he made Margaret every night before bed, because he knew she drank it, because she had mentioned it to Claire on the phone, and Claire had mentioned it to him. He had done it the second night she was there. His plan, as best the detective could piece it together, was that Margaret would be found in the morning, too late, and it would look like a medical event, a woman in her mid-60s with a history of mild hypertension. These things happen. The insurance policy would eventually pass to Claire, and Derek would find a way to access those funds through his wife, who had no idea any of this was happening and who was, at that moment, sitting in the same precinct in a room down the hall, talking to a victim's advocate, and crying in a way that I understand now she has not fully stopped doing. There are things I am not going to describe to you in detail, because they don't need to be described. The week in the hospital. The chair I slept in next to Margaret's bed. The way she looked when she finally opened her eyes on the third day, and the first thing she said was my name. The conversation I had with Claire in the hospital cafeteria at midnight when she had finally been told what her husband had done, and how she sat very still for a long time without saying anything, and then put her head down on the table, and I put my hand on the back of her head the way I had when she was small. These are things our family carries now. They don't need to be made into details for anyone. What I will tell you is about Dolores. Dolores Reyes had come to clean that house on Wednesday afternoon as scheduled. She had a key, because she always had a key. When she came in, she found the house empty. Derek had gone to his office, and she began her work in the front rooms. When she got to the guest bedroom, she found my wife, and she knew The way a woman who has spent a lifetime paying close attention to people knows that something was wrong that was not a nap and not a health spell. She called 911. She stayed with Margaret until the paramedics came. She rode in the ambulance to the hospital, which was not required of her and which nobody asked her to do. She waited at the hospital for 2 hours until a nurse told her there was nothing more she could do and that the family had been notified. The nurse had been told this by Derek, who had arrived at the hospital, spoken to the attending, and then left. And then Dolores went back to that house. She did not go home. She went back and she sat on that porch and she waited, because she said she did not feel right about leaving until someone who loved that woman had come. She waited 6 hours. I want you to understand what that means. Dolores Reyes had finished her workday. She had no obligation to anyone in that situation except her own conscience. She had a husband at home, a daughter who called her every evening. She sat on a porch in the dark for 6 hours because she could not make herself leave. When I walked up that path, she was still there. I have thought about that more than almost anything else in this whole story. The prosecutor's name was Michael Ferris, and he was thorough, and he was serious, and he did not make promises he couldn't keep. He told us early on that the case was strong, but that the outcome would depend on the jury, as outcomes always do. Derek had hired an attorney who tried several approaches, that Margaret had brought the medication herself, that Derek had no knowledge, that the search history was research for a client who worked in pharmaceutical sales. None of it held against the evidence. The man who had supplied the drug testified. The financial records laid out the motive in clean columns. Derek's own phone records showed a call made to Claire's number the morning after he drugged Margaret, in which he had left a voicemail saying he was worried about her mother and thought Claire should check in a voicemail he had crafted, the prosecution argued, to create a record of concern while doing nothing. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Derek Marsh was convicted of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy, and procurement of a controlled substance with intent to harm. He was sentenced to 22 years. He will be eligible for parole consideration in 18. Claire filed for divorce from the county jail waiting room the day he was taken into custody. She signed the papers without reading them. Her attorney told me later, which was unlike her. Claire reads everything, and I understood that she just needed it done. Margaret spent 6 weeks in rehabilitation. Her recovery was complete, her doctors said. Though complete is a word that covers a lot of ground. There are things that change in a person after something like this. There are mornings when I come downstairs and she is sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold, and I know she is somewhere far away in her thoughts, and I just sit down next to her without saying anything. We have learned to do that. We updated our estate documents. We simplified them. We sat with our attorney for 2 hours and went through everything line by line and made sure that every arrangement we had made was exactly what we intended, and that no document, in anyone's hands, was worth more than a life. Dolores came to the sentencing. She sat in the 3rd row. She wore a blue blouse and had her hair down, and she looked like someone who had been holding something for a long time and was ready to put it down. After it was over, I walked over to her and I tried to say something adequate and I could not find the words, so I just took her hand in both of mine and I held it for a moment and she nodded, and that was enough. Margaret sends her flowers on the 1st of every month. There is something I keep coming back to. Something I think about when I'm up late or driving long stretches of highway alone with the radio off. We spend so much of our lives being careful with the people we love. Careful not to say the wrong thing. Careful not to push too hard. Careful to wait and see, and give the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes that carefulness is wisdom, and sometimes it is just fear wearing the clothes of wisdom. I was careful about Derek for 4 years. I watched and I waited, and I told myself I had no proof. Dolores Reyes did not have proof either. She had a woman lying still in a guest bedroom and something that felt wrong in her chest, and that was enough for her to act. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm not saying blow up your family on a feeling. I'm saying pay attention. I'm saying the people who love you are not always the ones who share your name. I'm saying sometimes the person sitting on your porch in the dark at 10 o'clock at night who has no reason to stay is the one who saves everything. Margaret is in the kitchen right now. I can hear her humming something I don't recognize. The kitchen smells like the soup she has been making all afternoon. The one she only makes when the weather turns cold, and the one I have loved for 38 years. We got a second chance. I know what that is worth.